Philosophical Mysticism, Lesson 46, The Gods of the Mind. So the gods of the mind. So I take it the major constructs of the mind are archetypes, primitive ideas, and proto-archetypes. I've talked about these in previous lessons. Um, and these constructs have causal power over us. And all of these have been our objects of reverence, even worship. I take these constructs to be the gods of the mind. I also take the gods of the mind to have a story to tell. And their story has been retold countless times through the ages in one form or another by every culture on earth. Because this is going to be the story of mind. It's going to tell its own story. I want to focus on Greek mythology in particular. I mean, there's other mythologies as well, but I'm going to focus on Greek mythology. And we'll see that if Greek mythology is not taken to be a story of actual people or even actual gods, but rather a story of archetypes and ideas, it makes much more sense. In fact, we could even take Greek mythology to be a somewhat accurate history and genealogy of archetypes and ideas in the mind. At least in my view, it's pretty good. It's a pretty good history of the mind that Greek mythology tells. And again, the story being told is from the point of view of the archetypes, the primitive ideas, the ideas, and the proto-archetypes. Cosmogony. So let's start from the beginning. There are varying cosmogonies in the Greek tradition, but most agree to something like the following. In the very beginning, before there was anything, there was chronos, time, and chaos or nothing. So that's sort of the beginning, the start point. But if we sort of follow my interpretation here, and if we take this seriously, it's going to mean that if we're telling the story of mind, it's going to mean that the mind starts with time or the conception of time. And I take it this is the right view. I think that's where the mind really does start. And I argue something similar to this, in my previous lesson on death and time, where I argue that time shapes our perception of reality or even creates reality. Time is fundamental and necessary for consciousness to emerge. So this is the case, which I take it to be. It makes sense that this is where the story of mind would begin, with time. So time and nothing. So time sort of brings reality into existence, at least mental reality into existence. Chronos and chaos produced the cosmic egg, which hatched Phanes day and next night. Here, I think the cosmic egg could be interpreted as the mind. So the cosmic egg that hatches is the mind, with the day representing consciousness and night representing unconsciousness or the unconscious. In this sense, the world didn't truly come into existence until perceived by a mind. So it's sort of setting up the basic origin of our mental universe here. It's going to start with time. And then from there, we get the sort of separation between the conscious and unconscious, or consciousness and unconsciousness. The First World Order. Phanes and Nyx gave birth to Gaia, Earth, Uranus, the heavens, and Eros, love. I interpret Earth, or Gaia, to represent nature, the heavens to represent non-material reality outside of nature, or the non-physical, and love to represent emotion. And we can see the sort of interplay of these three in the production of mind. We should also acknowledge, or at least I think it's important to acknowledge, the important role of emotion in our creation story. And I argued that earlier, very, very early on in my book and in the lessons, I argued that sophisticated emotions was the first major catalyst in the development of mind. And I argue that this actually goes as far back as Homo habilis. This sort of emotional singularity where things sort of get set into motion. I think it actually goes back as far as Homo habilis. So it makes sense in sort of looking at the mythology that one of the earliest things that's going to sort of emerge or sort of present itself is going to be emotion or eros. The mingling of these three first led to the birth of monstrosities, like the Cyclops and Hecatoncheires. The Cyclops, of course, has one eye, and Hecatoncheires has 50 heads and 100 arms. At least that's how it's described in Greek mythology. So these sort of monstrosities, they're not really human. These first gods I take to be the archaic archetypes. So these sort of non-human, sort of weird, primitive constructs in the mind I take to be the archaic archetypes. Eventually, though, Gaia gives birth to gods with human-like features, being the 12 original Titans. Oceanus, Themis, Rhea, Coeus, Crius, Tethys, Phoebe, Hyperion, Iapetus, Mnemosyne, and Kronos. Not to be confused with Kronos. So Kronos is not the same as Kronos. So this is sort of the next generation are going to be going to have these more human-like. They're going to be more human-like than the archaic archetypes. And these are going to be the Titans, the 12 original Titans. I'm taking the 12 original Titans to be representative of the more advanced anthropomorphic archetypes. It's sort of that we sort of talk about today. So the Titans, the 12 original Titans, are more human-like, and they're going to represent the anthropomorphic archetypes, the more advanced anthropomorphic archetypes. And with this, we might have what might be viewed as the first world order of the mind. So the first world order, you have the archaic archetypes, and then you have the anthropomorphic archetypes. That's going to sort of set the first world order of the mind. The second world order. So Uranus turned out to be a terrible father, and he hated his children. He hated the Cyclops and Hecatoncheires in particular, and banished them to Tartarus, the deepest pit beneath the earth, far deeper than like even Hades. And I think Tartarus to be a rather clear representation of the deep unconscious, and that seems a pretty easy sort of really easy interpretation there. That Tartarus is just the deep unconscious, and sort of comparing this mythology tale to actually a story of the mind. So Tartarus is just a deep unconscious. And in this sense, the archaic archetypes become repressed and forgotten. So you sort of get pushed to the unconscious, the deep unconscious, far into the mind, where it never really sees the light of day. Losing her, so once sort of the Uranus banishes the archaic archetypes to Tartarus, the deep unconscious, and this makes Gaia very upset. And she wants to free her older children. So she tries to solicit the help of her other children, the 12 Titans, in order to overthrow Uranus and free her other children. Only the youngest Titan, Cronus, offers to aid his mother. And again, really important here, Cronus is the youngest, so he's the newest. So in terms of like developing mental constructs here, he is the youngest and the newest Titan. So he's going to be somewhat, maybe not advanced, but he's going to be somewhat different than the other Titans, because he's the sort of newest sort of model of Titan that sort of comes into existence. So the youngest Titan, Cronus, is going to offer to aid his mother. Gaia gives Cronus a powerful sickle, which he uses to castrate Uranus as he attempts to lay with Gaia. So he uses the sickle, he sort of mutilates and castrates Uranus. In his mutilation, Uranus flees, and he disappears. And with Uranus deposed, Cronus becomes the ruler of the world. I mean, of course, like I said, this is a story of archetypes and ideas. It's not to be taken literal as actually Cronus castrating some human-like or human person or a person with parts or something like that. But something like this does occur. And I take it the castration of Uranus has really important symbolic significance. By being castrated, Uranus no longer is able to reproduce or create new lineages. And because of this, this permanently severs the link to the heavens or non-material reality. So if there is a non-material reality, a non-physical reality, we sort of, once this happens in the development of mind, the link sort of gets severed here with Cronus castrating Uranus. In Cronus and the other Titans sort of going to start a lineage that is much more earthbound. It's not really like non-physical, non-material in the way it might have been before. Let's say there is some type of non-material mind out there somewhere. What happens with Cronus and the Titans is they become more earthbound. But Cronus does absorb some of his father's power. It inherits his non-physical aspects. And his lineage will in some sense be non-physical because he's going to sort of take this non-physicality from his father. I take Cronus to represent the primitive idea of God. So Cronus, the newest Titan, is going to become, once he castrates Uranus, he's going to become the first, or he's going to become the primitive idea of God. So he becomes a primitive idea. And again, this is ideas in my theory in philosophical mysticism are non-physical. So of course the primitive ideas are also going to be non-physical. So this is going to be what Cronus inherits from his father Uranus. Second World Order continued. Upon gaining power, Cronus fulfills his mother's wish and frees the Cyclops and Hecatoncheires from Taurus. He marries his sister Rhea, and with the rest of the Titans rules over the world. This might be viewed as the Second World Order. Second World Order, you have a single primitive idea ruling over the anthropomorphic archetypes, and they're sort of working together. Versus the First World Order, where you don't have any primitive ideas, you just have the archaic archetypes and you have the anthropomorphic archetypes, only those two. But the Second World Order, you have the primitive idea, single primitive idea, and then you have the anthropomorphic archetypes under the primitive idea. It is suggested that Cronus ruled peacefully for a very long time. For instance, in antiquity, rule under Cronus describes a golden age for mankind, or at least the first men, which might be interpreted as early humans. So we sort of are moving ahead to the evolutionary line. So again, we started way back with Homo habilis. Now we're sort of moving forward to sort of like the first Homo sapiens. Maybe a little bit before that. But yeah, so we were probably very likely early Homo sapiens. So it's sort of this peaceful rule. The Second World Order tends to be pretty stable, and it was around for a while. But eventually, Rhea begins to produce offspring. Whether it be from Gaia or whispers from the lingering Uranus, Cronus hears the prophecy that one of his children will depose him as he deposed his own father. And in this paranoia, Cronus is going to rebanish the Cyclops and Hecatoncheires and swallow his children as they're born. As Rhea gives birth to them, Cronus is going to swallow his children. In desperation, Rhea secretly replaced her last child Zeus with a stone, the Omphalos stone. So the stone here is the Omphalos stone, so it should be familiar. It's on the cover of the book. It's on the sort of first slide of this video, the Omphalos stone. That's the stone that Rhea feeds to Kronos, pretending that he's consuming Zeus. So Kronos is going to consume the stone, thinking it's Zeus. And with that being done, Zeus is then hidden away outside of Kronos' reach. Something worth mentioning here, in terms of both Uranus and Kronos, is that paranoia of being overthrown is a persistent characteristic of the Godhead in all forms taken. There will always be hostility toward rival ideas, and depending on the form, this extends to other ideas in general. The true desire of God is to be the only idea that occupies the mind. So for the Godhead, there can only be one. There can only be a single primitive idea. And Rhea's children are going to be new ideas, rival ideas that challenge Kronos or God's authority. The primitive idea of God, the Rhea's children are going to be a challenge to that sort of status of being the only one. Third world order. After Zeus matures, he and his mother seek out the help of Metis, Zeus's older cousin and the first goddess of wisdom, to save the rest of the Olympian gods. And I take Metis here to represent intelligence. So the new gods here, the new ideas, the new gods, the new non-primitive ideas are aided by intelligence. And again, this is sort of telling this evolutionary story along with it. So they're aided by intelligence, or this represents humans becoming intelligent or having bigger brains and so on. Metis crafts a special emetic to give to Kronos. So it gives it to Zeus to give to Kronos. In disguise as a cupbearer, Zeus feeds the emetic to Kronos, causing him to regurgitate the swallowed gods. Poseidon, Hades, Demeter, Hera, and Hestia. So Kronos is going to sort of regurgitate the swallowed gods. Upon seeing his children freed, Kronos is going to flee. And in gratitude, the emancipated gods make Zeus their leader. And this then leads to a brutal war between the Titans and the newly freed Olympian gods. And the war here, is between the anthropomorphic archetypes and the primitive idea of God and the new gods, or the new ideas. And something significant to look at is how the Olympian gods were freed. With the aid of Metis' craft, intelligence, they escape out of Kronos' mouth. I take this to represent or be representative of the evolution of language. Speech allows the new gods ideas to escape out of the mouth. Whereas they were for the most part trapped before. The ideas were trapped inside of our heads before. But speech, language, allows the new ideas to escape out of the mouth so they could actually be in the world or be transferred in the world. Language also allows ideas to become more sophisticated. For instance, we could give Apollo a bow and lyre and associate it with the sun, give them the power of healing and prophecy. Whereas before, we were limited to a basic form or model. If it's just stuck in the head, ideas can only become so complex without language. So language allows for ideas to become a lot more sophisticated. With the assistance of Metis, a few Titan defectors, and the Cyclops and Hecatoncheires, newly freed by Zeus, the Olympians win the war against Kronos and the Titans. One thing I should point out here too is, I think it's kind of interesting, is that the Cyclops and Hecatoncheires, or the archaic archetypes, they keep getting like imprisoned and then freed again, over and over and over as the need arises. So they keep kind of getting banished into Tartarus and then brought back and then banished again. I think what's going on here is that these archaic archetypes are just so ancient, they're so old, and so much a part of our evolution that you just can't get rid of them. They're always going to make it back at some point. They're sort of just part of human nature itself, probably going even further back than humans. Maybe even further back than Homo habilis. So the archaic archetypes, they just keep coming back. They're being rebanished. So there's something going on here. It's probably they're just so much a part of us that we can't escape it. Okay, so yeah, the Olympians win the war against Kronos and the Titans. Zeus then banishes the Titans to Tartarus. And one easy way to interpret this is that ideas, the Olympians, replaced the anthropomorphic archetypes, the Titans, and then pushed them to the deep unconscious Tartarus. So the ideas just sort of replace the anthropomorphic archetypes as sort of being the sort of center of our reality or of our mind. And again, we could kind of see this today. The anthropomorphic archetypes are not conscious; they're unconscious. All the archetypes are going to be unconscious. They're not on the surface. So they have been pushed back. I mean, even the conditions right now, currently, is that the anthropomorphic archetypes are sort of in our unconscious. They're sort of hidden. Whereas the ideas are conscious. The ideas are out in the open. They're exposed. They're with us. They're consciously reflected on. So that's sort of what happens with this sort of transfer of power. With the Titans gone, Zeus and the other Olympians, who go to 12, rule over the world. And this establishes the third world order, the reign of ideas. And this is best exemplified by polytheism. Each god, represents an idea. And there's many ideas, so there's many gods. And this has been the sort of state, polytheism has been the state in most places on earth. For most of our history, we have been polytheists. So this is sort of a very stable world order. But it did eventually fade away, at least in the West, and in some sense in the East too. Polytheism did kind of fade away. So we should acknowledge that the Greek pantheon and polytheism will eventually be replaced by a monotheistic Judeo-Christian God, at least in the West. In the East, it's more complicated. But in terms of this sort of replacement here, I don't necessarily see this as a new world order as far as the mind is concerned. The Judeo-Christian God in his simplicity is more like Kronos than Zeus, in my opinion. sort of God in the Judeo-Christian tradition is much more like Kronos than like Zeus. Perhaps it's a return to the second world order, ruled by a single primitive idea and all of its anthropomorphic archetypes, sort of assisting him. Reflected like in the church mythos. So I think like Christianity, it's not a new world order. It's just a reversion to the second world order. The only thing that's really changed are the names are different, but it's the same setup. You got God, the primitive idea of God, a single primitive idea, and then you got the anthropomorphic archetypes. Whether they be like angels, saints, all the sort of mythology in the Bible, the sort of symbolism, it's all there. So you got the single primitive idea of God, and you got the sort of anthropomorphic archetypes assisting God. The angels and so on. Putting that aside, Greek mythology does talk about wars to come and impossible new world order. So it is in Greek mythology, there are these predictions of new world orders. One war to come might be against the giants, sort of lingering products of Uranus. That's one predicted war to come. And I think the giants could just be interpreted as the embodiment of the archaic archetypes. So the archaic archetypes are always there, and it's possible they could sort of regain control if they wanted to, if it was possible to do. But a more important war, I think, according to Greek mythology, will be the war between the gods and Gaia's monstrous offspring, Typhon. And Typhon is supposed to be like the most like sort of terrifying creature ever created. So this is sort of a prophecy of a war to come. I think it is a war to come. And I think Typhon best represents the proto-archetypes. And again, I've talked about the proto-archetypes in previous lessons, previous videos. The proto-archetypes, given time, may be able to replace ideas as focuses of reverence and worship. So over time, given enough time, the proto-archetypes will eventually seize control. And in some ways, this is already happening, with culture, as it advances, with technology. The proto-archetypes are gaining power. They're building power right now. And the proto-archetypes could also be forming an alliance with the artifacts to control us. I've talked about the artifacts as well in previous lessons, manipulative artifacts. There could be this alliance formed between the proto-archetypes and the artifacts that sort of seize control and create a new fourth world order, replacing the ideas as their sort of objects of worship. And again, we can kind of see this unfolding now in terms of what's happening with the proto-archetypes. And with the proto-archetypes, even if, let's say they are assisted by the artifacts, this could potentially lead to a new world order of the mind. And it seems like it's going to happen. Seems like it's something that's coming. So if you look like at the pic on the side, you see a dragon and a giant and these gods fighting the dragon, the giants, and the world burning down, sort of like Ragnarok, right? Ragnarok. It's interesting here because, it looks like something like from Dungeons and Dragons, but I think it's a telling of a story, and this is, for whatever reason, this is the way that humans make sense of these sort of changing conditions in the mind. It's just easier for us to represent this sort of battle as dragons and giants and gods and warriors and all the stuff of fantasy. It's easier for us to make sense of what's going on in the mind with these sort of make-believe images or whatever. Of course, like what's really going on is a lot more complicated. But this is how we make sense of it. We've been doing this forever. Since civilization, before civilization, we've been trying to sort of make sense of these sort of battles between the archetypes and the ideas through sort of symbolism, these sort of images of dragons and giants and demons or whatever. And that's the best way we can make sense of it. And even today, we're still sort of creating these types of fantasies in literature, movies, whatever, that have these same sort of images, these sort of dragons and giants and gods and so on. We have the same imagery because it works and it sort of tells the same story that we've been telling forever. The last world order. Surprisingly, something you don't really see in mythology, if very rarely, if ever, is mankind rising up and overthrowing the gods ourselves. Why not? Maybe, the gods of the mind just never really even considered this to be possible. The gods of the mind think so little of us that they never even considered that this could happen. And for them, it wasn't even a story that was worth telling or prophesizing. How would humans ever defeat the gods or overcome or destroy the gods? It's always some ancient forces, giants, monsters, dragons, demons that challenge the gods. Why can't humans completely free ourselves of the tyranny of the mind in its entirety? Rather than just simply, replace one master with another, whether it goes to the next world order, reverts to a previous world order. Why do we have to just replace masters rather than completely freeing ourselves? So maybe humans should declare war on the gods or the gods of the mind. And perhaps the final war to be fought is between mankind or you and the gods. With, if we're lucky, a few titans and a cyclops or two taking our side. That'd be nice. Even maybe the archaic archetypes taking our side to defeat the gods or the ideas. Maybe, a cyclops might be our ally in doing this. Of course, cyclops represents something a lot more sophisticated going on in the mind. It's just how we represent them in our imagination. Liberation from the gods of the mind is possible. It is possible to liberate ourselves from the gods of the mind. And I think my book, my theory, Philosophical Mysticism, does sort of offer a path of liberation. Liberation is possible. I think I offer a way to do this in my book. I'll give it in these lessons as well. But I think the first step is realizing that there is this sort of war that's been going on since the beginning. Of course, we imagine it in sort of fantastical ways, but there is a sort of a battle between archetypes and ideas, and these are major constructs of the mind. It's been going on for a long time, and it's not like it's trying to hide it either. It's telling us a story. It sort of, we keep writing the same thing or telling the same tales over and over again. There's something to this. We should liberate ourselves. We could do this. We don't have to do this as a species. We could do this individually. Like I said again, I give a way to do this in philosophical mysticism. But really, it's up to us to write this new story. It's time to write the new story. We need to write it ourselves, rather than just sort of getting inspiration from the unconscious or whatever. If you want to learn more, check out my book, Philosophical Mysticism, A Spiritual Handbook for Mankind by Nicholas Schroeder. Definitely worth a read.